Thank you very much. Can you hear me, by the way? Crowd voice. So I think I know just about everybody in the room, so it's not a problem if I make a fool of myself, you know. Thank you all very much for coming. A lot of friends here, family, people from my writers group, the U3A book group. Thank you all very much for taking the trouble to come out here today. Before I start talking about the book, I'd also like to thank, for once, people involved with my publishers. First of all, Leslie, my publisher, who has let me get away with murder over the years, pretty much. The thing is that when a publisher takes you on for the first time and you write a book in one genre, then they're expecting you to stick to that lane, stick to that genre for the rest of your career. The reason is obvious because people usually only read one or two genres, so you build up a readership by writing in the same genre each time. So let's look at the 5 books of mine that Leslie has published. The first one was a non-fiction book about science. The second one was a thriller involving a reincarnated Egyptian pharaoh. The third one was a spy thriller talking about China. The fourth one was a travel memoir. And this fifth one is a blackly comic murder mystery. So that's 5 different genres in 5 different books. And I'm betting that is actually a world record. She's let me get away with it, and God love you, because a lot of publishers wouldn't. I mean, I wish I was so full of ideas, you know, really significant underpinning ideas for books, that I had enough to write in just one genre, but I don't. I get these ideas very infrequently, and I'm afraid I have to, you know, write what I think is important to the people to read. So the second person I want to grudgingly thank is James Campbell, my editor. We've had many arguments, spirited conversations over the year about everything from spelling mistakes to when the first steamship line started between India and England. And in this latest book of mine, he's developed this unhealthy fixation about the layout of my protagonist's flat. I mean, you've got to know a bit more, mate. Really, he's very fussy about this. But we are friends, and he did recently take me shooting in Perthshire, but he missed. You can't get rid of me that easily, Jim. We were shooting targets, not people or animals, by the way. The third person is this gentleman here, Stephen Cashmore, who proofreads my books. Now, why this is important, let me point out, this book you see today is the 14th draft of the damn thing that I've written. Okay, now I hear tales of authors who can write print-ready prose first time round, but I think they're up there with kind of unicorns as mythical beasts. My first draft is a matter of squeezing my head and getting it all out on the paper. And it looks like the contents of my head, you know. It's bland, it's banal, it's glib, nothing's been developed. I'm just trying to get the basics down. It's like, I guess, a sculptor who gets a block of stone. He bangs off the big corners, but then he has to use finer and finer tools to make something that is a work of art. And by the 13th draft, believe me, it's a finely tooled work of art. I mean, it's fabulous. By that time, I've read it 13 times. Jim has read it twice. Leslie's read it once. So it is perfection. And then it goes to Stephen Cashmore, and it comes back looking like a plane crash, you know. Stephen typically finds between 300 and 400 errors in this thing I've read 13 times. Now, I am a vindictive man, as many of you know, and Stephen also writes, and I was sent one of his short stories to review, and I found an error. Yes! I mean, I opened a bottle of champagne that night. No, but all 3 of them, thank you very much for helping me produce these books. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly talk about why I wrote the book and what it's about. And then I will read you a short passage, it won't be very long, and then you can ask me any questions that you like, not why are we born to suffer and die, because I haven't worked that one out myself. Why did I write this book? The reason I wrote this book was the same reason I wrote the last book, and that is COVID. Most of my ideas for books come from the travels that I do. For example, my travels in Egypt informed that book about the reincarnated pharaoh. My travels in China gave me the idea for the spy thriller. But the trouble with COVID is I wasn't going anywhere at all. So luckily, it was Leslie who actually suggested I write a travel memoir first of all, because I've done a lot of traveling in my life. I have no sense at all. I get into a lot of trouble. Hopefully people would find it funny and interesting. So that kind of, that was the first 9 months of COVID. But then I needed another idea for the next 9 months. And it was my wife, Anne, who suggested I write a crime thriller, well, a murder mystery, in fact. Now, this isn't a genre that I read very much, but I realized that I could use stuff I already know. The first instruction to a writer is write what you know. So I thought I could get elements that I did know something about, and I could put it together into a murder mystery, hopefully a blackly comic murder mystery. I hope you will find it amusing. And there were 3 threads that I thought I could write about. And the first one was modern academic life. Now, I was actually employed by the health service, but I did a lot of research with the university, and I had an honorary professorship with Glasgow University. So I've had a lot of experience of how academia has changed over the past 50 or 60 years. Now, in the old days, say 50 years ago, academic life was an absolute doddle. I mean, looking back, it was criminal. I mean, for a start, the students were afterthoughts. They didn't really matter. The university couldn't sack you. They couldn't tell you what things to research. Every few years, you could get a year off, a sabbatical year. You could go abroad and work with a colleague, or you could write a book, or you could drink yourself to death on a tropical island. It didn't seem to matter. All 3 were done. And even, believe it or not, but in those days, some academics had it written into their contract. They had to take a minimum of 8 weeks leave a year. No maximum was specified, but you had to have a minimum of 8 weeks leave a year. Now, some of you who've worked in the private sector are probably seething by now that they got away with this. Well, things have changed, but I would suggest they've swung too far in the opposite direction. Nowadays, it's easy to sack people at university. Whole departments can be closed down, and over the next year or 2, I think we'll see 2 whole universities go to the wall. So, and also nowadays academics have to justify their existence constantly. Now, some will say in the private sector that's what they have to do all the time anyway. But the difference is that academics are paid less, because in the private sector you get a kind of premium in your salary because you have to take that degree of job insecurity. So they have a really rough time nowadays, and this has bred some senior managers in the health service who are pieces of work, let's put it that way. In the old day, deans were never pussycats because there was always internal politics, but now they are firing, they're closing whole departments. They have become much more hard-edged. And I wanted to write about this in a slightly satirical way, yeah. And in fact, Leslie sent the book out to be reviewed by a lovely reviewer who likened it to a latter-day Kingsley Amis story about Lucky Jim, about academic life. So that's what I tried to do. I've tried to make those aspects funny, but it is about the hard-edged life in academia nowadays. Now, the second thread I wanted to talk about is a bit left field, and it's about the paranormal. Now, a friend of mine is here tonight, Nick Kyle, and he was the president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, and he's quite a well-known paranormal investigator in his own right and quite a famous medium. And he had the idea during lockdown to start a Zoom group to which he invited a lot of people in the paranormal investigation field who were well respected within that field. And he also invited me to come along as well as the kind of in-house skeptic, because I was very skeptical of the paranormal, and 2 years later I'm still very skeptical of the paranormal. But at least this experience got me to know more about the paranormal itself, and also about the people who were involved. Now, when I started out, I wasn't entirely positive about these people, but my respect did grow over the years. I mean, some of them are on the woo-woo end of the spectrum. I'm not looking at you. On the woo-woo end of the spectrum. But others were perfectly reasonable people to whom something really unusual had happened, and they felt that modern science couldn't explain it away. So they were genuinely trying to understand a strange phenomenon. So I wanted to incorporate that as well, and the kind of the wheeze that I came up with to try and show the conflict between the academic world and the paranormal world was that the university is having a hard time in terms of making money, so they are renting out their facilities during the holidays, and a conference of paranormal investigators has taken over the building. Now, caught in the middle is my protagonist. My protagonist is a psychologist. He lectures at the university, and he is a grumpy, cynical academic. Now, where do I get the idea? It's just pure inspiration. So he's caught in the middle, and he's had a pretty rough time as well. He was brought up by two psychiatrists who basically experimented on him. And he's really become a psychologist to try and understand why they were so awful. I mean, for example, they've given him a really horrible name in the sort of boy named Sue school of parenting. You know, you call your boy Sue and he spends the rest of his life fighting, so he develops a character. So they've given this guy the name Die Young, D-A-I, Young with an E, which is an awful name to have. So he's got all sorts of devils in himself, and he's caught between these two worlds, and also people start winding up dead. There's some truly horrific murders in this book. I'm sure you'll like. It's not comfy crime. It's funny, but it's not comfy crime. And in fact, there's one death on an MRI machine. Now, MRI was my clinical specialty, so it's hideous, but it is actually factually correct. There are a few MRI people in the audience, but they've killed people like that, I'm sure. So those are two threads. The third thread is kind of esoteric, but it's about my obsession with that fearsome old psychiatrist, Carl Jung. Jung was a psychiatrist about 100 years ago in Vienna, and he was mentored by Freud. And the two of them came up with the notion of they called it the unconscious, but nowadays it's called the subconscious. This is the notion that we are like icebergs. There's a little bit of us sticks above the surface, and that's the rational, conscious mind that we have. But underneath is a massive kind of body, the unconscious, full of kind of groups of instinctual behaviors, instinctual needs. And it's really these instinctual needs which govern the decisions that we make in life. And then we use our rational mind to retrospectively rationalize away why we came to that decision. For example, maybe a political party appeals to you quite viscerally, and it's appealing to your kind of instinctual self. And then you use your mind, your conscious mind, to explain why you've done it. Now, all political parties and policies have advantages and disadvantages, so you can easily construct a narrative to explain away what has been an instinctual decision. So these groups of instinctual behaviors he called the archetypes, but others have called demons. And the book is full of demons, which is why it's called Demons. There are the demons of the senior management at university. Now, maybe I'm overstating it a little bit there. I'm not seeing demonic behavior. I've seen demon-adjacent behavior in senior academia. And then secondly, we have the paranormal investigators who bring with them their own demons. Whether they are real or metaphorical is a question in the book. There are the demons, the Jungian demons that we all suffer from, and there are the devils and demons which drive my protagonist. So at the end of the day, what this poor guy has got to do, in order to sort of solve these murders, because he is in the frame for some of them, he's got to come off the fence and use his non-existent detective skills to try and work out who the murderer is. So hopefully you'll find that aspect funny, because he makes a big mess of it. But at the end of the day, he has got to essentially decide who or what done all these murders. Now I'm going to read a small section of the article, but can I just try and inculcate you in the ways of Jung by just reading one paragraph that Jung wrote 100 years ago, long before the Nazis came to power in Germany. And hope you'll see how prescient he is and how much his work, I think, still applies to the present day. In this, he talks about psychic. He doesn't mean the paranormal. What he means is psychic as in the psyche, as in the mind. So it's about the mind that he's talking about. The gigantic catastrophes that threaten us today are not elemental happenings of a physical or biological order, but psychic events. To a quite terrifying degree, we are threatened by wars and revolutions, which are nothing other than psychic epidemics. At any moment, several million human beings may be smitten with a new madness. and then we shall have another world war or devastating revolution. Instead of being at the mercy of wild beasts, earthquakes, landslide and inundations, modern man is battered by the elemental forces of his own psyche. So I think he was really anticipating the effect of the Nazis in Germany, but also I think many events today are also psychic epidemics, I would suggest. So I'll read a short 1,000 words from the book. I couldn't really pick bits in the middle because there's obviously development of characters and situations and plots. So I'm just going to read the first 3 pages. By the way, you don't need to know about Jung, hopefully, to enjoy the book. If there's anything about Jung, I do take the trouble to explain it as carefully as I can. Behind the skeletal Gothic tower, an array of smaller but very pointy spires made the University of Glasgow buildings look like a nail bed for a dodgy fakir. In the drizzling rain, a specialty of Glasgow, the tower looked Mordor-like. Product of centuries of back-breaking toil by malformed hobgoblins in pursuit of unremitting evil. Ironically, these gloweringly medieval-looking buildings were a Victorian confection less than 150 years old. They'd been designed to mimic the equally bogus Houses of Parliament. I was looking at a fake based upon a fake. For a supposed centre of international learning, this sham Lord of the Rings vibe sent out all the wrong signals. Orcs and quantum computers are never going to make comfortable bedfellows. After a drink or two, I wasn't shy of pointing this out to my colleagues. In today's up and atom, erect and thrusting world of academia, illuminating comments like that are as welcome as a cobra in a crib. Nevertheless, the University of Glasgow was a fine institution of higher learning and research. If only I worked there. No, my university lay just beyond in a warren of reclaimed tenement buildings and old sandstone villas. Many years its junior, the University of West Scotia lay just on the edge of Glasgow University, perhaps in the hope of catching academic excellence by proximity alone. Where Glasgow was high and refined, at least in its own estimation, we were down and dirty. Where they went for substance, we went for gimmick. And there was nowhere more redolent of the gimmick than the Department of Metaphysics and Psychology, known by the local newspapers as the lair of the soul hunter. This had infiltrated a whole row of tenements, and that's where my poky little office was to be found. The usual ragtag bunch of Christian fundamentalists were standing around the short flight of steps leading up to the entrance. Today their pinched and self-righteous faces seemed almost relaxed. Even they were looking forward to the summer vacation. Elsie, a florid woman in her 50s, whose regular fire and brimstone diatribes livened up our early mornings, had put down her "Burn in Hell Blasphemers" placard against some railings and was having a fag. I gave her a disapproving look, but she just shrugged. "School's nearly out, Di," she said. I shook my head. I thought the Lord's work was never done. Her eyes narrowed. "That's right, with sinners like you around." From the truculent Elsie, this was almost like a benediction. I felt even more depressed. Everyone was getting ready for the summer vacation except me. "How dare you enter without permission?" Well, the accent was genteel, the voice was sharp and penetrating. We all turned as Miss Murdoch, the departmental secretary, dragged a young man out of the department and down the steps. That he was wearing a suit meant he wasn't a student. Indeed, his whole buttoned-up vibe exuded offended Christianity. "Hey, leave him alone," Elsie said, stepping forward to protect one of her own. I guess that the coming holiday had turned the young man's head, and bored with standing around brandishing a placard, he decided to storm the heart of evil. Miss Murdoch turned to face Elsie. I'd never seen anyone in the department dare to stand up to Miss Murdoch and was intrigued to see what would happen next. She moved a little closer to Elsie, not Glasgow pub just before a fight close, but close enough so they could probably smell each other's toothpaste. Miss Murdoch wasn't big, and her nicely tailored designer suit suggested an unfamiliarity with street fights. But there was always something hard and implacable about her. Elsie visibly flinched. "Get your placards and your acolytes and get out of here, Elsie, before I call the police." Elsie was having none of this. "It's a free country, at least the last time I looked. We can protest wherever we like." Miss Murdoch's smile was cold. "Not on university property, you can't." and you can't go around physically assaulting the young girl on reception. I was just waving my banner, I didn't see her, said the young man miserably. Whatever Christian spirit had vitalised him seemed to have fled, leaving behind a rather worried individual. Miss Murdoch ignored him. You'll have a police record, Elsie. Whatever employer he has in future, I'll make it my mission to make sure they know all about his criminal activities. I'd noticed that with Miss Murdoch. No matter how gently I demurred with her on some trivial administrative matter, things had got dark really quickly. Elsie was an annoyance, but over the many months, we'd all sort of grown used to her. It's always good, no matter how benighted you are yourself, to have at least one person you can feel superior to. Now she looked like someone who had brought a knife to a gunfight, and I felt sorry for her. So much so I had no stomach to stay and watch the inevitable climb down. As I edged forward towards the steps, my movement must have caught Miss Murdoch's eyes, for she turned to look at me. I didn't like what I saw. Usually calm and expressionless, little fracas must have cut through her sang-froid, and I glimpsed both disdain and triumph. It would seem she knew something I didn't, and that something was bad. Thank you. So, any pertinent questions you want to ask me? Oh, come on. Well, that's never happened before. Robin.
Someone who's spent an hour in an MRI machine, can you tell me what pages that sums on? Thank you.
Aggie.
Hi. You say you don't read much crime thrillers, but who have you read? Who you rate?
Well, I mean, obviously I've read the old Agatha Christie ones. They were pretty good. Most others, yeah, I've forgotten. I wasn't really that impressed with the genre. It was just really something I could hang these three threads on. I mean, hopefully you won't guess who the villain is, or who or what the villain is. But I was trying to follow the conventions in that sense. But yes, yeah, well, I've done the best I can anyway.
Barrie, how do you work? How do you plan, the amount of words you'll write, whether you put the book away and then pick it up and start again? What's your kind of work pattern?
Well, when I first retired, which is a long time ago now, I was still motivated by the work ethic to the degree that I could only, if I wrote for 3 hours a day, I could then feel like a goof off for the rest of the day. Now, as time has gone on, that has shortened, and now I can do an hour and feel justified to play video games or read books or whatever. So I'm slowly killing the work ethic, but it's still there with me. In terms of books, usually I've kind of plotted it out beforehand, and I just day by day go down and write the next bit and the next bit. But as I say, I go through 14 drafts typically, so there can be quite big changes from what originally appears to what comes up at the end. Yes, I mean, I do like writing. It is a discipline, and it does give me sort of the kind of fulfillment that I used to get from work, but which I don't get anymore. So it's actually quite good for my mental health, I think.
If you're doing a crime novel, you have to make sure that you keep all your whodunit bits correct, and there's no inconsistencies through the book. How do you do that? How do you sketch it all out, or do you just?
Well, there may be inconsistencies, but it's his fault and his fault if there are. Yeah, you've got to have a plan. You've got to, and also you send it to readers, and they say, "Nah, come on, that doesn't make sense." That helps you out a bit. My wife reads early drafts as well, and helps me with that. But yeah, it's just a mental discipline which I haven't necessarily had to use with my other books. Yeah, that's right.
I was interested to hear in your different genres, but do you see if this was really enjoyable, sequels to follow using the same characters in the same genre?
Well, Leslie's gentle hints about genre have now escalated to death threats. She's told me I've got to try and stick to one frigging genre. Sorry, that's the expression. And the next book, I'm trying to write using the same character, a different situation. I've written about 20,000 first draft words, but there's something missing from it, I have to admit. There's something else I've got to work out what to bring to it. But we are starting travelling again, my wife and I, so hopefully we're going to head up the Mekong in a couple of months' time. Hopefully we'll get some weird idea that I can transfer to the book there. Doug?
Why have you invented a fictitious university in Barrie rather than place it in Glasgow University when you work?
Well, it could be the libel laws. I mean, that's a possibility, but I want to make it absolutely clear that the characters in my novel bear absolutely no relation to people living or dead, and I will go to my grave protesting that. Don't worry, you're not in it. But next book, mate, your name's written all over it. Robin.
Since you've compared Glasgow University to Mordor, I think that boat might sail down.
Right, do you have a mental image of your protagonist? If I was writing a book, my protagonist would have a full head of hair. Do you have a mental image of the kind of... Because I hear a lot of authors, when their books get translated to the television, and they get upset when they see the person acting their hero, when they see the hero in flesh and blood.
Yeah. I think this hero is just like a kind of average guy, basically. He's a bit like me in that sense. So I wouldn't mind who played him. I'm trying to think who would. Someone like me. I mean, Charles Laughton's dead, unfortunately. So maybe Brad Pitt or something like that. Some gnarly old character actor, I guess, would be the one. No, it's just an average kind of guy. And that's. I didn't think it was anything special to look at, to be honest.
What inspired you to make the parents both psychiatrists?
Well, it wasn't your mother and me. Well, I wanted to give his life an unfortunate edge, and I've been reading a lot about some of these old psychiatrists who did terrible things, completely unethical things nowadays to young children. There was this kid called young Albert 50, 60 years ago, and what they were trying to do was to introduce an aversion to him. So whenever he got a cuddly toy, they would blast a loud noise in his ear. And this really screwed the kid up, so he couldn't touch toys, and they made him averse to lots of different things. And he died actually not long afterwards, but in fact it turned out he had hydrocephalus, and that's probably what took him away. But the point is, it was a study of one using someone who had an existing pathology, so it was a useless study. Maggie, you probably know the details better than I do, that it was a useless study. But the psychologists and psychiatrists, did really, really terrible things. There's a lot more ethics control nowadays. But I wanted someone who would have experimented, messed up my hero, basically. I wanted to make him a bit disturbed, because he brings his own devils and demons to this book as well.
Barrie, you say at the beginning of chapter 21, the most important question anyone can ask is, so I naturally gravitated to it, what myth am I living? Now, I know you as a scientist, a material reductionist, an unbeliever, a heretic, but you're writing about the world of demons in part, and they're delighted with what you've written, because you're portraying them as some kind of subjective, internal, psychological, subconscious phenomenon. And I just wondered if you would like to answer your own question. What's the myth that you're living?
Okay, firstly, that's a quote from Jung. That's not, I'm not claiming that one. But no, my time, and this is Nick, by the way, the time with the group, I did feel that Jung had a lot to say about the paranormal. In fact, in later life, he wrote a book about the paranormal. But his notion was that all of these things, these voices, these visions, were coming from the unconscious. And because our conscious mind is unaware of our unconscious, the stuff was being generated internally, but they couldn't recognize it as such, and therefore it was manifesting as an external phenomena. And I mean, I know we disagree about this, but I think it does probably explain a lot of the paranormal. At the same time, Jung got a little bit woo-woo himself towards the end of his life, And he came up with the notion of the collective unconscious, so that our unconscious is, all the different unconsciousness are connected in some way, but below our rational consciousness, so that maybe you are seeing things which are not available to the rational mind. So there is the possibility of something more than just simply a manifestation of unconscious desires. Does that help?
No, you focus on Jung, the focus of the question was on yourself.
What is my myth? Jesus.
That's an interesting myth.
I don't know nothing, mate. You got me there. I cannot think of an answer to that one. Well done, well done. Any other questions?
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barry.